But the question is still going to come down to ultimately in terms of whether you would be successful is, can you run a business? Can you hire with the support of the franchise company, but can you hire, motivate, retain, challenge a team? Because in most of these businesses, it ultimately comes down to, you've got to build a team of people.
This is Get Unstuck Podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs who prioritize their life first, business second. I'm Mutita Panmuk, your host, who dedicates my life to designing and building a business that supports lifestyle. We will learn together from entrepreneurs around the world how they overcome their life challenges, their business obstacles, and yet still get unstuck from the hamster wheel of burying themselves into their business. Because time is the number one commodity in the world that you cannot get back once it's gone. So let's shorten the learning curve and see how can we prioritize better. Let's get unstuck.
Hi, Get Unstuck Nation. So today, a very exciting and interesting episode. So please welcome Jeremy Bollington here to Get Unstuck Radio today. Jeremy is a franchise consultant with Your Franchise is Waiting, where he works with individuals to help them explore the franchise options that they may want to invest or interested. And he also specializes in those who want to immigrate to the US as well. So we are also going to cover about that. So without further ado, please welcome Jeremy with me. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Mutita. Thank you so much for having me on this morning.
I am so honored to have you on.
Pleasure to be here. So I look forward to the conversation.
I was we were talking a lot, but back offline. So I think we're going to have a very fun conversation today. But before we start that though, Jeremy, how you started this consulting entrepreneur journey, by the way?
Yeah, I made probably a 180 degree sort of pivot from my pretty much lifelong career in the banking world. So I live in the US in South Carolina now, but grew up in the UK, went to school there, got into the banking world, worked for many years for HSBC, the big UK based, but kind of global bank, obviously with a huge presence in Asia. Got the chance to go to the US in 97 for 3 years, and 25 years later we're still here. So that 3 years became, we want you to stay. The bank sponsored a green card for myself, my wife, and my kids, and so we stayed. We lived in Hong Kong for a year in the middle of that time. But long story short, I spent 25 plus years in the banking world, working with primarily big, certainly the latter sort of 2/3 of that career were with big multinational corporations, Coca-Cola, Nike, Procter & Gamble, people like that, and kind of working with them around the world and ultimately running teams of people doing that. And then I was with HSBC and then another British bank, Standard Chartered, for 4 years at the end of my banking career, and then I got laid off, which was I was just about to turn 50. Our youngest child had just gone to college, and I was like, I'm unemployed. What do I do? And it just, I just felt like life's too short to, kind of just go through the motions. I financially, we had done well in the banking world. I was talking to a number of banks, but there was nothing that was particularly exciting. And I started to explore kind of franchise, I started to explore business ownership options. And I was we were also deciding to move we lived in the New York, New Jersey area. We were deciding to move down to South Carolina. And I sort of, I went through a process probably over a 9-month period of looking at, do I start a business? I just felt like I didn't have any good ideas. and I didn't really have the confidence to, kind of launch something. I looked at some coaching sort of ideas, but couldn't really get, sort of excited about that. I looked at were there any businesses for sale in this market. And Charleston's not a huge market. It's just under 1 million population. very kind of, at least at the time, it's changing a bit now, but at the time, very tourist kind of service industry orientated. So, we were talking about food obviously earlier, lots of food, lots of food businesses for sale, but restaurants, but I couldn't get excited about that. And so I started to dive into franchising and franchise ownership because it felt like that was the middle ground, if you will, of you're still absolutely starting your own business. There's a lot of risk still, people fail, but if you pick good systems, you're kind of doing it under an umbrella of proven systems, other owners in different markets that you can consult with, lean on, take advice from, etc. And so I ended up I looked at a lot of different industries and decided to go into two of all things in the beauty space, which you might look at me and say that's not really a good fit. But I think what that shows is that it's less about the absolute. You don't have to be an expert in the product or the service. That's what the franchise is kind of bringing. You just have to be able to build a team and run a team and market a business and follow a system. And my wife and I did that in two. One of those businesses was a women's hairstyling business where I was actually helping them grow across the Southeast. So I was recruiting franchisees for them, brought in a number of franchisees and worked with them to get their businesses open and coached them. So that kind of scratched that coaching itch that I had. And then secondly, the other business, which we still have, the first one we sold a year or so back, but the other business is a waxing business, hair removal, something that I would never, ever, I knew nothing about. Now I know lots about it, but I spend, I don't know, probably 5-10% of my time on that business now. I've got managers in place and it largely runs itself with a little bit of tweaking and management. So that gave me sort of business ownership experience. And it was sort of interesting because obviously, I'd worked with companies at the absolute opposite end of that spectrum, these massive multinationals. I'd worked for very big companies. It's really different when when you're the one having to write the check for the payroll at the end of the week and the business isn't making money when you start out and that. So I think I learned, we made some mistakes. We absolutely made mistakes along the way there. But I think what that gave me, I started the franchise consulting business, which is really basically helping people that were in the same type of position as me, deciding that they wanted to go into business ownership and helping them explore that maze of franchise options. And so I started that 4 years ago, partnered with an existing consultant. And that's really where I spend most of my time now, helping people navigate that, like what might be the right fit for them. Be that somebody coming out of kind of corporate America, or, as you touched on, I spend a lot of my time now actually focused on people trying to find a business to support an E2 visa application coming to the US. And I love, having done that myself, albeit in a different situation, I love helping people kind of, that have that passion to come to the US because it's a great country and it's a great place to do business.
Let's go back to the business part first. I would like to know, how can you know that this franchise is right for you? How can we discover that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer truthfully to that is you won't ultimately know until you get into the franchise and there is that. You're never gonna. It's sort of interesting. One of the things that sometimes I'll work with somebody where there's a lot of fear about is this right for me? Am I going to succeed, etc. And you're absolutely right to ask those questions and to worry about that when you're looking at the business. But what I would say to anybody that's in that position is you're never going to get 100% guarantee that this business is going to work for you. It can be the most successful franchise with a whole roster of successful franchisees. But the question is still going to come down to, ultimately, in terms of whether you would be successful, is can you run a business? Can you hire with the support of the franchise company, but can you hire, motivate, retain, challenge a team? Because in most of these businesses, it ultimately comes down to, you've got to build a team of people. And so that, what I will always say to my clients is that you should be able to get to that sort of 75 to 85% confidence level in terms of the, feeling comfortable with the team at the franchise company, the franchisor, speaking to a lot of existing owners in the system about, the support they get from the franchise company, the financial results that they have, how they got customers, what's the staffing environment like, are they able to retain staff, etc., and get a lot of comfort from that with a good system. But then that final, kind of, let's call it the final 15%, kind of comes down to the owner. Can you then take all of those tools that the franchisor gives you and execute on that? Because it's not, there's really no franchise system where it's a case of you just write the check and the business happens and money flows in. Anybody that tells you that there is that case, like, I would say just run as fast as possible in the opposite direction away from them, because it's not true. You've got to work at that business. What I will do, so what does that mean when I work with somebody? We spend a lot of time up front before we even look at businesses, really trying to sort of understand, what are your goals? What are your skills? What experiences do you have, from corporate life, from business life, that are transferable? So maybe, if somebody comes to me and says, I've had no sales experience and I'm just not comfortable walking into a room and talking to people, but I'm really good at managing teams and process and operations. So what I'm going to look for there is a business that does not require the owner to be like that super salesman, but maybe it's a very, staffing heavy business, and where the building of that team is like super important. And so, yeah, it's sort of looking at those, what are the transferable skill sets, experiences, goals of the individual as well. Obviously financial position comes into it, and then looking to match all of those things with franchises that we work with that have got a proven track record.
So I think from what I hear from you is that when someone considering become a franchisee shouldn't get into a franchisee world with investor perspective, but have to at least enter the franchisee world with business owner perspective, because you still have to run it at the beginning, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about the structure of if you're a franchise owner, franchisee, would be the term. You're still starting your own company. It's your company is making, you're basically signing a long-term agreement with the franchise company to acquire the rights. I know we talked about food and restaurants and things. Let's use that as an example. Let's say it's a burger chain, that you're acquiring the brand name or the rights to use that brand name in a certain geographic location. But you're basically, you're spending money to build out the premises, to fit it out, to then hire a team. It's your team, not the franchise company's team. They're your employees. You're spending the money on marketing. The franchise company. So somebody might say, well, gee, what's the point of the franchise then? What am I paying all those fees for? Well, you're buying in, you're getting a brand. You're not having to create a brand from scratch. You're getting the system, in terms of how do how do they do business? So using my waxing studio as an example, I could never have started that business. I knew nothing about the aesthetics world. I had no idea how to hire estheticians and so the franchise company gave you a lot of support and training around that. And that's what that's what you get initially. I'd say once you're up and running and the business is hopefully, successful, often then people start to think like, why am I still paying these royalty fees? I'm still paying for the franchise. And what I always say on that is it's so again, I'll use my waxing business as an example. I'd say over the last 2-3 years, they've rolled out multiple initiatives, be that some systems initiatives, some, improvements on, kind of how customers book appointments, different types of services, brand marketing collateral that, okay, could I do all of those without the franchise? Probably, but there'd be quite a cost. And so, I think it's always that sort of balancing act, because at the end of the day, you've got two different businesses. You got the franchise company that make money typically they're making money from the royalty that they charge you every month. Yes, you pay an upfront fee, but that's largely, their cost of finding franchisees, that most of that gets eaten up with those initial fees. So a successful franchise system is only successful if franchisees are doing well and the franchisor is making money. I mean, you're all in business. And that's what we spend a lot of time trying to ensure that we're working with good franchise systems where there are successful franchise owners, and the franchise company is viewed as being very supportive of those franchise owners.
So is there types of franchise? Like, are they?
There are hundreds.
I mean, not in terms of industry, but like how they structure the fee, right? I mean, how they categorize the franchise, though. I don't even know.
Yeah, I would say, so in terms of fees, there is, it obviously varies by franchise, but I would say the common sort of standard-ish, if you will, would be you typically will pay an upfront fee to the franchise to kind of buy into the system. That usually ranges for one either physical location, or if it's a service business where you get a territory, which might be a number of zip codes. That initial franchise fee would usually be somewhere between, let's say, $35,000 to $50,000 is roughly US dollars, is roughly the range. On an ongoing basis, you would pay to the franchise company a royalty, which is basically a typically a fixed percentage. Some of them are not percentages. Some of them might be a fixed dollar amount, but in most cases, it's a fixed percentage, usually between 5, 6, or 7% of your top line revenue. So it's an absolute cost every month, and that's basically paid each month. And that you as a franchise owner, you that upfront, you factor that into your assessment of the business. And as I said, I view it as I have to pay that every month. I believe I'm getting value for it. I mean, there might be months when I'm like, gee, I wish I didn't have to pay that, but that's a function of the business. I wouldn't be in the business if I wasn't partnered with a franchise in that in that business.
You can consider it as a fixed cost.
Yeah, well, it's fixed. It's absolutely. I mean,
right.
It's also it's a percentage. So the way that I look at it, certainly in my business, I look at so my staffing cost, that typically we try to manage that to a percentage of revenue. My cost of goods sold, so things like wax and other things, typically we're trying to manage that to like 7, 8, 9% of revenue. My royalty is 6%. I know it's there, and I have to. It comes out every month. So yeah.
It reminds me to. Oh my gosh, I forgot his name, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, every time I hear royalty, it just reminds me to you.
Yeah, that's funny. Now, of
Yeah.
course, he's typically on the receiving end of those rather than the paying end of.
Did you mention also that you sold one of your franchise?
Yep.
So you are also able to sell it also, right? You can exit it.
Absolutely. So typically, most franchise agreements are 7 or 10 years in length, and I would say obviously everybody's situation varies. I mean, for us, it was sort of a bit of a lifestyle decision. My wife was running that business. I think some of your theme of get unstuck. I think for her, she was spending a lot of time in the business. It was a business where we had to be hiring continually, and I think she just felt stuck. So one way of getting unstuck was actually selling the business, and so we did. But the way that works is it's really no different to selling. And let's say we had a hair salon that was not a franchise. If we were selling that business, there'd be like two main parties that you'd be dealing with. One would be ultimately finding a buyer. So you'd be negotiating with a buyer. The other part would be with the landlord, because you have leased space in a premises, and the landlord has to approve they're effectively going to get a new tenant because it's going to be the person buying it. With a franchise, the only other difference there is that you have another party, which is the franchise company, has to approve the buyer. They will put the buyer through their sort of new franchisee training, and you will basically assign the franchise agreement. So, when we sold the business, we got out of it clean, and a new owner took over, became the franchisee for that area.
Replacement, let's say.
Yeah. So it's I would say the good thing actually. So the interesting thing. I mean, so yes, you've got that extra kind of approval level, if you will. But I would say the interesting thing so you think about one of the challenges of buying a small business is just the due diligence, because if it's just let's go back to that example of if it were just a standalone salon. The benefit with the franchise is that buyer of that business was able to actually go talk to existing franchisees in other markets about exactly the same process that you would go through if you were becoming a new franchise owner and opening a new location. So that is one of the benefits of both being a buyer or a seller of an existing opened franchise location, is that you can do that extra due diligence that you wouldn't get the chance to do if you were buying an existing kind of standalone like mom and pop business, let's say.
And to prevent having competitions nearby as well in that case, right? Like that's how they can control the cash flow within the area. That's what I see. Yeah, that's
yes. You typically, you would. Again, it depends on the type of business. If it's a physical location, so let's say a salon, typically the franchise agreement will have a circle around that salon. Maybe it's 3 miles, 4 miles, depends on the density of population, and the franchise can't put another operator into that territory. If it's a service business where you get, let's say you get 10 zip codes in a market, you will be the only operator in those zip codes, and so you're protected. There might be, it doesn't stop competition from other brands providing a similar service, but you wouldn't be competing with existing or other franchisees in your system.
That's good, because when you embrace the same brand at the same time, it's going up at the same time. So that's I know.
The other thing on that is, I think so coming back to the Mr. Wonderful and the royalties and stuff, which a lot of people get hung up on. So one thing I will always say to people, and I've definitely seen this. I mean, we were open during COVID, and this was like a huge value that you can't put a price on. One of the benefits of being in a franchise system is that you've got lots of other owners. If it's a good system, those owners communicate and it's almost like a kind of an informal like support network. And we definitely saw this during COVID, the ability to call up somebody where you're not competing because they're doing exactly the same business, but in a different city, a different market. And over time you become, I become friends with lots of people in the systems that I'm in. But to be able to call somebody up and just say, hey, can we just talk about like, what are you doing about the government support program? What are you doing about, sanitation service, particularly during COVID when we were all dealing with stuff that we'd never dealt with. You just can't put a price on that. I mean, that is just like so valuable. And if you were a mom and pop business, it's like calling a local salon down the road. Maybe they'll help you, maybe not. So it's, I think that ability to almost like a mastermind kind of group, if you will, of people in the same business. I mean, that's just incredibly helpful, I think. And you get that, you're not paying a fee for that. I mean, but you kind of are because you're getting it, it's part of the role. I mean, I view that as like part of the benefit of the being in the franchise. I mean, having that. Yeah. And it does, and it's interesting because certainly in the systems I'm in, there are a number of people that just don't seem to take advantage of that. And I'm always like looking at it going like, why wouldn't you? It's sort of one of the biggest benefits of being in a system.
Talking about benefit. So you mentioned about moving the country, like those who like me, for example, I'm overseas, right? And I want to immigrate to the US, for example. I don't know. Too complicated, but anyway, we're gonna talk about that. Like E2 visa, like I have like B1, B2 visa on myself already. So I can enter and then in case I'm interested. So how can like investing in a franchise can help me then?
Yeah. So the E2 visa is probably one of the, certainly there are a number of different business related visas that you can invest through. I would say E2 is the lowest investment requirement. And it's sort of interesting in the rules, it doesn't actually specify a minimum, but it basically says it needs to be a substantial investment, which is not particularly helpful. But that the way that we interpret it, and I think most people involved with E2s interpret it, is that you should typically be investing a minimum of $100,000 US. We've certainly seen approvals slightly below that, but I think the risk of non-approval goes up if it's below that. So my starting point is usually let's look at 100, 125, 150,000 if somebody is able to to invest that amount. Then the other key element of the E2 is that the money has to have been invested before you apply, or at least a substantial portion has to have been invested. So if we stick to that, let's say 125,000, if that's the amount that you're investing to start the business or to buy, so you can certainly apply for an E2 if you purchase an existing operating business, but that's often quite difficult to do because if I'm a seller of a business, I don't really want to sell it to somebody that I'm not sure that they're actually going to come and get there, because there's a lot of the risk around E2, and so I mean certainly people do buy existing businesses and get E2s. I mean that certainly happens, but I think in a lot of cases it's hard to get a good business. Maybe you're getting a business that the seller couldn't find anybody else to buy, and because if you think about it, if I'm selling my business, if I get somebody inquiring that says, I'd love to buy your business, but I'm applying for an E2, so I'd like to have kind of an escrow arrangement agreed where I'll pay the money into this sort of holding account, and I'll close on the purchase if I get my E2 approved. Oh, but by the way, that's going to take 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months, depending on the country that I'm applying it. If I'm the seller, why would I sell to you? Unless I can't find anybody else to buy it, which to me is a big red flag, because is there something wrong with the business? Am I selling it for too high a price that nobody will pay that? So I always caution on that, buying an existing business for an E2. What your other two options are: you either start something yourself, so your own business, make that initial investment, or you can go the franchise route, where typically what I look at are businesses that don't need a physical store, because it's hard. I mean, certainly from an investment amount, those tend to be a lot higher investment ranges. So we're typically looking at service businesses where the initial investment would be the franchise fee, maybe prepaying marketing fees that the franchise company will invest for you when the business opens, maybe buying some equipment to get the investment amount up to that minimum requirement. And typically the franchise companies that we work with, not all franchises want to do E2s, because it can just be more challenging. But those that will work with E2s will typically agree to a kind of a refund clause for the franchise fee. If you do not get approved for the E2, they will refund some, often not all, but some of the franchise fee. It depends how much they've done. If you've started training with them, which we often will advise that it makes sense to start that training, because then you're much better prepared when you go to the embassy for your E2 interview, to be able to speak about the business and really understand the business. But yeah, I mean, that's in a nutshell, that sort of approach of franchise certainly gives a good amount of flexibility for the applicant. And we would then go through that prior, when somebody comes to me, we'll put them through that same process that we talked about earlier. What are your skills? What's your investment budget? Where do you want to be? Which market are you looking at? What's available? Let's find a business that meets your investment range and your skill set.
Would it be possible to become a partner with already existing franchisee?
That's a good question. Yes, if you're with E2, you have to be at a minimum of a 50% owner in the business. So it could be a 50-50,
like a 50 share.
Excuse me. It could be a 50-50 partnership, but you would have. So let's just think about that. If it was somebody that had an existing, location or territory for a business, could they sell you a 50% stake in their business? Yes. And you could show, you would be able to show that as your investment into a business. But you would have to, so two important things are, you would have to have the 50%, and you would also have to be able to show that you were moving to the US to manage that business. Doesn't mean to say you're going to be working in the business. Let's use your example of restaurant, but you would have to be able to demonstrate that you were moving to oversee and direct that business. That is the other. So it's not if it was a passive investment, that would likely not get approved. You would have to show that you were going to be actively directing the business.
If it's going to be passive investment, it has to be another route then.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I have seen the time, it's been many years. The time that I applied for the US visa, it's been a while. But people who got denied is literally because they apply for the wrong visa, or they give the wrong reason. That's it. Yeah. It's simple as that.
And I would say, it never ceases to amaze me how often people will go down the track of looking at options, spending, maybe even investing but not using a good immigration attorney. And I want to just caveat what I'm saying is I am not an immigration attorney, and so I won't. In fact, I won't work with anybody on my sort of like search for the right business for them as an E2 candidate if they are not using an immigration attorney, because you're absolutely right. It is so important to meet all the requirements. I mean, you can be turned down just because you skipped something that was maybe not a big issue to you, but it might be to the console.
Yeah, and you already wait for like 6 months or a year, and just one reason. Yeah.
Well, and potentially you've spent a lot of money. I mean, whether it's actually physically investing in a business,
financially.
Yeah.
So for those who already interested, okay, whether they're already in abroad and working for like corporate overseas and thinking to like move to the state, or they're already in the state working in a corporate and okay, I'm deciding whether I'm gonna have my own business or I'm gonna go to franchise route. What do they have to prepare?
What do they have to prepare? You mean in terms of making that decision as to whether to move forward or to research it? Or, I think there's two elements there. I think one is that element of, am I going to make that move from corporate or from, overseas to the US? So that's I think that's the starting point. Are you committed to doing that? I think then, and again, it doesn't mean to say you will do it. You're then going to investigate what's the best way to do it. So I think if you've made that, and I think back to what I went through, I'd sort of made the decision that I really seriously want to look at finding businesses. So, and then I sort of looked at, should I start my own business? Do I have any good ideas? Am I confident enough to do that? Or do I go the franchise route? And I would say for anybody that's, kind of in that, if they're at that stage of like, okay, I want to start a business, or I want a business to support a visa application, I think then you've got to think through, do I have the skill set and the background and the experience to start my own business? And I think if you're coming to the US, add into that equation, I'm moving to a new country. I'm probably not going to have a network of people that I know, new culture, different culture. Can I start do I have a business idea that will work? Or am I better to take somebody else's idea and be part of that franchise kind of structure? There are pros and cons. I think what I've seen, I think generally, is that if somebody has been an entrepreneur either in their corporate life or in their home country, I think if they are very entrepreneurial, franchising often does not make sense for them because they would feel constrained by the system and paying that royalty and other things. But if they haven't had that experience, if they've been part of a corporate world, I think it's very hard to start your own business. And so I think that's where franchising kind of comes in as the halfway house, if you will. You're still absolutely starting your own business, but you're not having to come up with the initial idea, the branding. The franchisor has made all those mistakes and like redone it and changed it and tweaked it to get it to that point where it's successful, if you will.
So Jeremy, in case the listener wants to have some advice from you, where can they follow you or reach out to you then?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say if anybody's in that phase of like, does this make sense for me? I always am happy to do an initial consultation and we can talk through your specific situation, what might make sense for you. Does it make sense for us to work together. And to reach me, two ways: either our website, which I'm sure Mutiti will put on the show notes, but that's www.yourfranchiseiswaiting.com, all one word. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Jeremy Bollington out there. So that's one of the good things about having a non-common name. So look me up on LinkedIn and then just message me, and I'll absolutely respond on that.
I will make sure that the links will be in description below as well as in the show notes. So don't worry about that.
Perfect.
So
And I think the last
yeah,
thing I would say just on that, the way my business model works in the franchise consulting world is a little bit like, as we would say here in the US, buyer's agent in real estate, in that if I work with somebody, I don't charge you a fee. I get paid basically a referral fee from franchise companies. We have a network of over 500 franchise companies that we work with, and if I introduce somebody to one of those companies and they go through the what would be a very detailed due diligence process and ultimately proceed, then I get a referral fee from the franchise company. So the way that I sort of police that in my business is, we talk up front about your goals and then decide, does it make sense for us to work together? But yeah, I just wanted to get that in there.
yeah. So in case anyone have already considering having a franchise, and especially in the US, so you know who to reach out now. So Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing this helpful information to Get Unstuck Nation today.
Thank you. My pleasure. And so happy to be on your show. Thank you.
I hope this episode inspires you wherever you are in your entrepreneurial journey, so that you can have your business that supports your lifestyle. Get a show note at getunstuckmethod.com/podcast. Review what we have learned together today and start implementing right now. See it by yourself. The result of your consistent action are worth it. You deserve the freedom to enjoy your life. Until the next episode, let's get unstuck.